Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Agile Arcade. My name is Andy Ching. We are going to be getting into the first of my talking point videos today. Hopefully the first of many, and it will mean taking a wee step back from Atlassian for just a brief moment. This time I want to talk about something that sounds very, very simple, but can be incredibly disruptive. Switching to a more agile way of working. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Not every team needs to go agile, and not every organisation benefits from such a transformation. Sometimes the biggest improvement you can make is not changing anything at all, and I'm going to pose to you 5 questions which I think you should consider before even making the decision to go fully agile. But before we get into those questions, it's probably worth quickly clarifying what we even mean by the term agile. Because Agile isn't Jira, it's not Scrum, it isn't stand-ups or sprints or retros. Those are just tools. At its core, Agile is ultimately a mindset. It's about responding to change rather than rigidly following a plan. It's about delivering value in small increments, and it's about shortening feedback loops. And it's about trusting teams to just solve problems rather than execute instructions. So when we talk about switching to Agile, what we're really talking about is a cultural shift. This shift looks at how decisions are made, how work is going to be prioritized, how progress is measured, how leaders behave, more on that later. And that's important context for the rest of this video, because if Agile is a mindset and a cultural change, then adopting it is far bigger than just changing your board configuration or renaming your meetings. So before you go ahead and redesign all of those boards, retrain your teams, relabel everything as sprints and epics and all of those kind of things, here are the 5 questions I think you need to ask yourself before you take the plunge. Okay, so let's start with the obvious one. What problem are we actually trying to solve? Not we want to be more agile, not everyone else is doing it, not should we modernize. What is actually not working? Are we missing deadlines? Are we constantly firefighting production issues? Are our teams burnt out? Is quality inconsistent? Are customers waiting months for value? Okay, so that's a lot of questions, right? Rolled up into one there, but it all rolls up to the point of what are we trying to solve? If your current system already delivers predictability, maintains quality, keeps your people engaged, and ultimately is meeting the business expectations, you might not even have a process problem. What you might have is a branding problem, and that is not a good reason to run a transformation. Agile is a response to dysfunction. If you can't clearly articulate the dysfunction, then you should probably pause and reflect. An example from my career, I worked in the education sector some years ago, and that was a sort of organisation that had very specific deadlines. It had very specific needs. Things dropped at certain dates. Each year was very similar to the last with a bit of tweaking. And really, they didn't need that agile way of working. What they needed was predictability. Dates cannot move. They are fixed in stone. We know exactly what we've got to do. We've done it for years. What would be the benefit of bringing Agile into that sort of organization? That is the question. And I will talk more about that example in a future video, because it's also a little bit of a career defining moment for me. But ultimately that is the question there. In an organization which knows exactly what it's doing, its requirements are very fixed. There's very little change. There's no need for innovation. It's a proper known quantity. Why would you try and introduce Agile into an organization that has that? There's just no point. You're not solving any problems by doing that. So there you go. That is question 1. Let's move on to question 2. Okay, so this is an uncomfortable one, not least for me actually. Very often organisations will blame process for what are actually leadership issues, and I can say that as a leader in the industry for many years. And also, I've heard it all before. We need Scrum, we need Kanban, we need SAFe. But underneath all of that, priorities will still be changing every week without clarity. Teams still don't have the right level of autonomy, decision making is still opaque, product direction is still vague. Agile frameworks don't fix poor prioritization, they don't fix clear ownership, They don't fix micromanagement, and if leaders aren't willing to change behaviours, well then you're just going to be putting agile terminology on top of the same potentially dysfunctional culture. And that ultimately just becomes theatre. So the question then, before changing process, ask ourselves, are we prepared to change? And also, how will we lead the team through that transformation? Because that is the real shift. Okay, so question 3 then. Do we have a feedback problem? Agility is fundamentally about shortening feedback loops, failing fast, pivoting quickly. These are all important concepts in a business that is agile. So ask yourself this: how long does it take us to learn something? In other words, how long between idea and delivery? How long between delivery and user feedback? How long between bug and resolution? If it takes months to discover something didn't work, well then that is a signal. If releases are painful, risky and stressful, then that is a signal. But if you're already releasing frequently, if you're already measuring impact and iterating based on real data, then you might already be operating with agility, even if you don't necessarily call it that. Remember, agility and agile isn't about daily stand-ups, it's about fast learning and the ability to pivot quickly. If you don't have a feedback problem, well then you might not need a structural overhaul. A good example that I can give you, about 20 years ago, in the early stages of my career, I worked on a project where up to that point I had been using lots of different processes. Some of the younger ones out there might not have heard of these, so Rational Unified Process, XP, DSTM, RAD. A lot of them were kind of precursors to agile development. And we got to try these different things out, and some things were good and some things were not good, and we had the ability to try different things on different projects and see what worked and what didn't work. And we started this new project, we brought a new team together, we were all very, very excited about it, and we said, okay, well, what are the things that we really liked? What were the things that made us more effective and made us more effective as a team and in our ability to deliver? And we spoke about things like iterative development, the ability to regularly check in with the team, the ability to parallelize the work. So we were doing ideation and requirements at the same time that we started build, and we were also doing test as well. So all of those things together, we went, these are all really cool things. Now I look back on that example after 20 years and say, do you know what? That was probably the most agile-like project I've ever worked on, and we didn't call it agile. So think about that. Think about whether actually the way that you're working is really already the way that you need to be working. So don't just swallow the book on agile. Don't just go for agile because that's what everybody else is calling it. They might not even be doing it right. You might already be working in an agile-like way. And just remember that agile is about culture and mindset. It's not about a process or swallowing a book. So, Agile thrives in environments of uncertainty. So this is when requirements are evolving all of the time, markets are moving quickly, you're building lots of new capability, or you are simply just experimenting with ideas and innovation. Iterative delivery makes perfect sense in this world. But if your work is ultimately highly regulated, has a very fixed scope and fixed date, is repeatable and predictable, then heavy iteration might just introduce more overhead than value. Not every piece of work benefits from sprints, and sometimes predictability is absolutely the goal. Now that's not to say that you can't have predictability in Agile, but just think about the context of that question. So the key question here is, are we trying to create flexibility in a space that actually needs stability? If the environment is stable and well understood, then a structured model may ultimately outperform a pure agile one. And I'll refer you back to my previous example in the education sector, where this was needed, where we had very, very fixed deadlines. We knew exactly what we had to deliver. We knew when we had to deliver it. We knew what the changes would be from one year to the next. It was very, very stable. It had been done the same way for years. Yes, it wasn't the most efficient way of building it, but it worked and it delivered, and our customers knew exactly what they were getting. So in that world, again, Agile, perhaps not the way to go, and certainly not in the truest, fullest sense of the word. Let's have a look now at the final question. Okay, so final question, question number 5, and this is the big one. Do we want agility or do we just want different meetings? Ouch. That is hard to hear, right? But consider this. Real agility requires empowered teams, it requires clear product ownership, outcome-based thinking, transparency, and probably most importantly, it requires trust. It often means that leaders are going to need to give up some control. Work is going to be more visible, measuring outcomes is going to be the norm instead of activity. If the organisation isn't ready for that level of transparency, and I mentioned this at the start when we talked about what being agile or having agility really means, then what you'll end up with is stand-ups, retros and new boards, but with the same underlying issues. Because agile isn't a ceremony upgrade, it's a behaviour change, and behaviour change is really, really hard. So are you ready for it? Do you really want it? And importantly, and this kind of summarises everything really, do you really need it? Let's go grab my final thoughts on all of those things and try and bring that all together, and then we'll close up for this week. Okay, so all those questions considered, I have one final thought. That is, even when agile is the right move, consider this. There will be a dip in productivity. Productivity will slow down, confusion will certainly increase, old habits will resurface, and comfort will disappear to start with. If leadership expects instant improvement, then you're setting the teams up to fail. Real transformation is going to require patience and a lot of courage. Oh, and there's something else about that doesn't also get talked about enough. When you make that leap to a more agile way of working, and when those problems inevitably surface, visibility increases, work becomes more transparent. We've spoken about all of this. Bottlenecks get exposed, dependencies become more obvious. Weak product thinking shows up really, really quickly, and that will feel incredibly uncomfortable. Because suddenly the issues that were quietly hidden in long plans, status reports, steering decks, they're all right there now in the open. And of course the temptation at that point will be to retreat, to say, hey, this isn't working. Let's go back to the old way of doing things. Let's revert to the old habits, put the lid back on it. But that's the moment that really matters. Agile doesn't create the problems, it will reveal them. And I've definitely seen examples of this throughout my entire career. And sticking with it requires that courage that I just spoke about. It requires the willingness to fix forward, to address the root cause, to improve the system rather than hide the system. And that is where the real leadership work is. Not in running stand-ups, but having the gumption to tackle what really gets exposed. So there you go. In summary then, before you announce that big shift in ways of working, remember to ask yourself these questions then. Is something truly broken? Is this a leadership issue? Do we have a feedback problem? Are we operating in uncertainty? And are we ready to change our behaviour? That's a really important one, because Agile isn't just a badge, it is a response to a problem. And if you can't clearly define what that problem is, then maybe don't start the transformation. There you go. Thanks very much for watching, and I genuinely love to know, have you seen Agile done well, or have you seen it become theatre? I'd really love to hear your thoughts and experiences on this. Let me know in the comments. And of course, if you enjoy these videos, please do hit that like and subscribe button, hit that bell icon as well to get notifications for the next one. Other than that, just leaves me to say, until the next time, please do all take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, bye for now.